Welcome to the first installment of the Wedgwood International Seminar's Fall Zoom Lecture Series. Thank you for joining us. We are looking forward to another large audience today, as we have had during each of our spring Zoom lectures. We have 5, if you recall. And you might also recall that after the last series ended, we did an evaluation. And when the data was analyzed, we found that participants overwhelmingly felt that the project was so successful that WIS should create another season of lectures. And today we are pleased to kick off WIS Zoom lectures with such a prominent speaker. I would like to remind you that this lecture will be recorded, and it will join each of our previous lectures on the WIS YouTube channel. The easiest way to access the lectures is to just simply go to YouTube and type in Wedgwood International Seminar. During 2021, this has been the 65th year since the WIS was founded, and it has been our pleasure to bring and to present these lectures to the public free of charge. However, if you're not already a member of WIS, why not consider joining? Since in addition to these Zoom lectures, other benefits include an annual 4-day in-person seminar, the scholarly proceedings, which are edited by Dr. Ann Forshler-Tarish, and of course, the Fellowship of Ceramic Enthusiasts from around the world. To request a membership application, simply email the WIS treasurer, who is Sandy Olivas, and her email address, which is on the screen. You might want to jot it down, which is spolubas@fuse.net. She'll send you a form and you will be one of our members. A quick word on how today's meeting will be conducted. Dr. Forshler-Tarish will be the moderator. She will introduce our speaker, Dr. Tristram Hunt. The lecture will be followed by a time for a question and answer session. Please remember to type your questions into the chat box. It's at the bottom of your screen. After the Q&A session, I will take a minute or two to let you know about our next Zoom lecture, which will be in November. So now I'd love to turn it over to Ann.
Thank you, Lorraine, and welcome everyone. Good afternoon, good evening. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Tristram Hunt, who really needs no introduction. He's the director of the V&A Museum in London, and he's one of Britain's best-known historians. He also served as MP for Stoke-on-Trent from 2010 to 2017. He was a senior lecturer in British history at Queen Mary University of London, and he's written for radio and television, as well as a number of other books, including The English Civil War at First Hand, The Revolutionary Life of Friedrich Engels, and Building Jerusalem, The Rise and Fall of the Victorian City. Quite a range there, Tristram. We're very excited about his new book, Wedgwood, which of course has not yet been released in North America, but we're looking forward to that very soon. Thank you so much, Dr. Hunt, for being with us today. We're very excited. Please, everyone help me welcome Dr. Hunt this afternoon. And please, again, don't forget to add questions to the chat feature, and we'll answer those at the end of the program. So welcome.
And thank you very, very much indeed. It's wonderful to be with you. I'm going to try and share my screen, as they say. Do that. Let's see. Okay. Jeff, is that working?
Perfect.
Great. Okay, well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's evening here in London, and it's a great pleasure to be joining you to talk about my new book, The Radical Potter, which is published in the UK as Josiah Wedgwood and the Transformation of Britain, and published in the US by Metropolitan Henry Holt as Josiah Wedgwood, The Radical Potter, The Life and Times of Josiah Wedgwood, as you can see here. But I'll begin, if I may, with just some adverts for the Victoria and Albert Museum, a museum many of you will know and love, because one of the enormous pleasures of working there is the extraordinary range and wonder of our ceramics collection. We're particularly strong, as you know, in international contemporary studio ceramics, European porcelain and pottery from 1500s onwards. And I thought I'd bring to your awareness some of our American collection here, not least the mad potter of Biloxi, George Orr's great earthenware work, or the sculpture piece, the stoneware piece from Peter Wilkes, or of particular note for Anne, this Wedgwood portrait medallion of Henry and Nettie Booton, who began collecting Wedgwood in 1931 and were active and founder members, as many of you know much better than me, of the Wedgwood International Seminar, which I think Harry was an early president. So it's wonderful to have these within the collection. Since I became director, I brought, as we'll come to discuss, my passion for ceramics to the museum, and we've got a really exciting range of contemporary displays now part of the museum calendar. We had a wonderful Blanc de Chine display recently, and then we've just closed a really wonderful display on contemporary ceramic art from the Middle East. And then we open Richard Batteram's Studio Potter. Richard sadly just died this year. And so we will be kind of honoring and commemorating him.
Tristram, hello, I'm sorry to interrupt, but your screen is not in full mode. We're seeing all your slides on the side.
Oh, we don't want that.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
There we go. Is that better?
Yes, much better. Thank you.
Great. No, quite right. So here you see, yeah, Richard Batteram. So if the world opens up again, and if you find yourself in South Kensington, then do come and see the work going on at the Victoria and Albert Museum. So this evening, obviously, an absolutely terrifying invitation to talk to the Wedgwood International Seminar. And I sort of mulled over what I could possibly tell members of this esteemed organization, whose work I have drawn on so extensively during the course of the development of my own book. So rather than telling you the life and times of Josiah Wedgwood, which doesn't seem a great use of our time, what I thought I'd do is draw out some of the new themes and the new points that come from the book. And the points of interest. And I begin with this rather bizarre slide in front of you from the great historian E.H. Carr, who wrote the celebrated book, What is History? And what E.H. Carr always said was that you need to look to the motives and inspiration of the historian before you begin to read the history. So I thought I'd begin with my motives and inspiration for writing another life of Josiah Wedgwood, of which there have been so many, and you will all know that wonderful preface to Samuel Smiles's great life of Wedgwood in the 1860s, saying there cannot possibly be another reason for a life of Josiah Wedgwood. Well, ever since then we've kept going. So as Anne said, I began working on this book in late 2015 originally, during my time as Member of Parliament for Stoke on Trent Central. There are three constituencies in the pottery: North, Central and South, because those of you who know Stoke know that Wedgwood catches your eye the moment you step out of the Victorian Gothic train station. And there he is in Winton Square, cast in bronze, looking down at his copy of the Portland Bars. And he stands in front of the North Stafford Hotel, which remains the worst hotel in the Midlands, if not the entirety of the United Kingdom. So if you do come to Stoke, never ever stay there. And Wedgwood is across Stoke-on-Trent. In the words of the designer and the potter, Matthew Rice, Josiah Wedgwood is the acknowledged historic king of Stoke. Still in Stoke, we have the Canals Festival, the Etruria Canals Festival, which every June celebrates the wonder and importance of Wedgwood. We commemorate William Gladstone's opening in 1863 of the Wedgwood Institute in Burslem. And the Wedgwood Institute, still this absolutely fantastic building in Burslem, celebrating the history and meaning of pottery. Etruria, Wedgwood's wonderful house and pot bank is still a city council ward. It is still a legal district within Stoke-on-Trent, and there is an Etruscan primary school where the young people are the Etruscans. So all of this memory of Wedgwood is still within the city, and there are endless Wedgwood streets and closes and avenues, and I've canvassed lots of them. And of course, the landscape of Etruria has been built on so many times over the years, really from the 1860s onwards, when the steel industry began to encroach into the Wedgwood territory, then the railway industry, then when those declined, we had this kind of post-industrial transformation. Now it's office parks and it's sort of leisure spaces, but still Wedgwood, the memory of Wedgwood remains. Yet what got me particularly involved in thinking about Josiah Wedgwood was, as I'll come to explore, the state of the Wedgwood business was disastrous. In 2009, the business went into administration, and that put at risk the Wedgwood Museum and the Wedgwood collection. And it was the campaign to save the Wedgwood Museum which got me interested in Josiah, because it was Josiah Wedgwood himself who had first thought up the idea of building a museum, in a sense, to secure his place in the passage of history. He wrote in 1774, "I have often wished I had saved a single specimen of all the new articles I have made to be left as a sacred deposit for the use of our children and children's children, which with some accounts of what has been done and what may be done, some hints and seeds for future discoveries, might perhaps be the most valuable treasure we could leave them. For 10 years past, I have omitted doing this because I did not begin it 10 years sooner. I am now resolved to make a beginning." It's that classic line of when should you plant a tree, 20 years earlier or today? And having not begun 10 years earlier, Wedgwood begin. And out of that beginning came the Wedgwood Museum, originally an independent trust in 1962, before becoming a charity in 1998, crucially to protect its wonderful treasures from any corporate collapse. And those of you who've been there know it holds 80,000 wonderful objects and is dedicated to the people who have made objects of great beauty from the soils of Staffordshire. Yet, as I said, the business was in terrible trouble. And because of a very peculiar quirk in British pension law, the assets of the museum, because 5 employees at the museum had worked in the business, the assets of the museum became liable for the pension deficit of the company. And so all of the collection of Wedgwood, the world's greatest business archive, the most incredible account of ceramic and European civilization and British culture, was at risk of being sold off. Christie's had printed the catalogue. And so myself and many other people, not least the Art Fund and the Heritage Lottery Fund and other politicians and parliamentarians, launched this campaign to save the collection. And we raised around £15.75 million sterling, so around $25 million to save the entirety of the collection. And actually within the collection, some of the most valuable items were not Wedgwoods, they were the George Stubbs and Joshua Reynolds pictures. But thanks to the generosity of philanthropists and many people in Stoke-on-Trent, we saved the collection, and the collection was then transferred, irony to come, to the Victoria and Albert Museum. And so as director of the V&A, I'm now also have legal responsibility for this collection, which remains on show for free to the public in Stoke-on-Trent. So during that 4-year battle to save the Wedgwood collection, I came more and more to appreciate the dexterity and elegance of Josiah Wedgwood's work, the range of his production, the richness of his friendships, and the breadth of his intellect. I used to stare at that bullish portrait of by Joshua Reynolds and that family scene by George Stubbs, and really reflect on how this singular, radical, determined potter had unleashed such energy across 18th century Britain and indeed the world. And in the process, I came to understand the international regard and the deep affection for Josiah Wedgwood and the Wedgwood brand, the significance of the archive in the history of British industrialization, and the cultural capital, the resource it held for so many generations of designers and ceramicists. It was this great space of inspiration. And as a local member of parliament, as a constituency politician, I realized this collection was also the story of the people of the potteries, their creativity, their industriousness, their identity, their civic pride. And I suppose this takes me really to the first interpretive development within the book compared to previous biographies, which is to situate the story of Josiah Wedgwood within a broader account of East-West trade flows, which necessarily reflect the concerns of the current age, particularly here in Britain, as we wrestle with our kind of consequences of Brexit and our place in the world. The book starts with an account of Earl Macartney's embassy to China in 1792. Officially, this mission was a mission by one of Britain's leading diplomats, the first ever embassy to China. And he was carrying a letter from King George III congratulating the Chinese emperor on attaining his 83rd birthday. In reality, his mission was to convince the Chinese to open up their huge markets by reducing tariffs, accepting East India Company trading posts, upping the export of tea and silk, and allowing bulk imports from Britain. It all sounds very familiar to us now. Quotes, to excite at Peking a taste for many articles of English workmanship hitherto unknown there. Such an increase in the importation from this country might turn the balance of the China trade considerably in favor of Great Britain. And so you can see in this slightly grotesque caricature by Gilray, Earl Macartney almost prostrating himself before the celestial emperor, sort of surrounded by the baubles and toys of manufactured goods that they hoped to impress the celestial court with. So there were sword blades from Birmingham, there were varnish cloths, there were lustres and argent lamps. But most remarkably of all, I think, is that Earl Macartney thought it was a good idea to, in a sense, take China to China by including within this package 6 Wedgwood vases. Wedgwood jasperware, valued at £169, 17 shilling, stands in the official register of goods purchased for the embassy to China as perhaps the most outrageous testament to an unwavering British belief in their own ingenuity, design, and manufacturing prowess. China, the land that had fired exquisite ceramics for thousands of years, which had invented porcelain, which had filled the cabinets of Europe with blue and whiteware, was now to be re-instructed into the mystery of clay by pottery from Staffordshire. As Wedgwood himself had once prophetically boasted, "Don't you think we shall have some Chinese missionaries come here soon to learn the art of making cream colour?" Now, in the event, the Chinese emperor was resolutely unimpressed. Not only did Earl Macartney refused to execute the full kowtow, the court dismissed the ambassador's tribute with weary contempt. We have never valued ingenious articles, nor do we have the slightest need of your country's manufactures, explained the imperial edict delivered to Macartney. And slightly unfairly, when you see the butter pots coming out of Staffordshire in the 18th century and some of the treasures, some of the porcelain treasures emerging from China at the same period, you can see the skepticism of the celestial court to what they had to learn from Britain. But the looming reality was that it would indeed be British manufacturers that over the coming half century would trigger the rise of the West and the relative decline of the Asian economies in the global marketplace. And one of my contentions in this book is that Josiah Wedgwood's business marks the pivot point of what economists call the Great Divergence, when European and Atlantic wealth creation accelerated past the economies of Mughal India and Qing China. Colonialism, consumption, and new energy sources kindled the fires of the Industrial Revolution, here seen at Coalbrookdale or Arkwright's Cromford Mills in Derbyshire, or indeed the potteries in North Staffordshire. And this remarkable transition in wealth and power unleashed by the Industrial Revolution, unleashed by the consumer revolution of the 18th century, can, I suggest, be charted through the creamware, the jasper, the basalt pottery, which emerged from Josiah Wedgwood's kilns in Stoke-on-Trent. Wedgwood's marriage of technology and design, retail precision and manufacturing efficiency transformed forever the production of pottery and ushered in a mass consumer society. With Thomas Newcomen, Richard Arkwright, and James Watt, Wedgwood was one of the founding figures of the Industrial Revolution. And as we reflect now, some 250, 300 years on, of the end of that Western hegemony, with the resurgence of China and the economies of the Far East, it's perhaps interesting to explore what first inspired that rise to power through the material culture of Wedgwood. And so that, and I'm glad we have colleagues from the West Coast with us today, is the basis for my slightly audacious claim that perhaps we can regard Josiah Wedgwood as the Steve Jobs of the 18th century. Wedgwood is a defining figure for the Industrial Revolution, perhaps in a similar way to Steve Jobs to the digital revolution. Walter Isaacson's 2011 biography of the iPad, Mac, Apple genius recounts how it was Jobs's, quote, passion for perfection and ferocious drive that revolutionized 6 industries: personal computers, animated movies, music phones, tablet computing, and digital publishing. For Isaac, Jobs stands, quote, as the ultimate icon of inventiveness, imagination, and sustained innovation. He knew that the best way to create value in the 21st century was to connect creativity with technology. So he built a company where leaps of the imagination were combined with remarkable feats of engineering. And I do think that in Wedgwood's combination of design and manufacturing, of aesthetics and technology, of marketing and branding, and this incredible psychological feel he had for the needs of the consumer, there was an element of the Steve Jobs genius, which is why also I think, even at a distance of 250 years, Wedgwood's vision and passion, technical ingenuity and business acumen, just the sheer brilliance of his entrepreneurial insights, speaks excitingly to us today. So that's the first contention: geopolitics and Wedgwood's place within the Industrial Revolution, and that interrelationship between East and West, sort of captured in that early embassy of Earl Macartney to China. The second contention connects to the title of the radical potter. And that alludes not only to Wedgwood's radical impact upon the production of pottery, but also his political thought. And I hope one of the contributions of the book is a more detailed account of Wedgwood's political philosophy, which was frequently contradictory and sometimes clearly influenced by commercial considerations. But I think there's also more work to be done here. And at its core was a commitment to what I call radical patriotism. Wedgwood's politics were infused with the patriot ideology, which you will know in the 18th century wasn't simply just a love of country. It was also a much more radical critique of where the country was going and how it was being ruled. So his politics were infused with this patriot idea, which he had first encountered in the poetry of James Thomson, author of Rule Britannia, I should know that, author of Rule Britannia, amongst other patriot poems. One of those patriot poems was Liberty, in which James Thomson writes of England, Britain, as the blessed isle, as the rightful heir to the civic republican traditions of classical Greece and Rome, a blessing which had been put at risk by the spectre of corruption and ministerial greed and jobbery and aristocratic self-regard. Thomson has his goddess Liberty urge her Britons, quote, to be firm, nor let corruption sly twine round your heart indissoluble chains. Wedgwood particularly admired Thomson's depiction of the ethos of liberty and public virtue found in the ancient city-states. Happy would it be for this island were his, Thomson's, three virtues the foundation of British liberty: independent life, integrity in office, and a passion for the common weal, more strictly adhered to amongst us. So you can see his vision of what Britain should be, most wonderfully and clearly, of course, in the Temple of British Worthies, this remarkable celebration of civic republican political thought in the gardens of Cobham's Stowe. And he celebrates that vision in the frog service for Empress Catherine the Great of Russia. So it was a kind of Whig patriotic idea of a Britain ruled well with an ideal of liberty under the law and Protestantism at the heart of it. Wedgwood's patriot politics were on display similarly in his trenchant flag waving for the great naval heroes of Britain in the 18th century, Admirals Vernon, Rodney, and Keppel, all of whom consciously identified themselves as patriot opponents to the timid, peace-seeking, back-scratching court of King George III. Now, at first glance, there were some glaring contradictions to Wedgwood's position. On the one hand, he supported military leaders who stood at the forefront of British imperial expansion abroad. So those great moments of sort of popular imperialism when Portobello or the great naval battles went in Britain's favor, he would rush to celebrate in the production of mugs with the images of great military figures on. But on the other, he sided with the American rebels fighting to free themselves from colonial rule. These apparently contradictory attitudes were in fact united by a patriotic sense of what Great Britain should be, and which at times he thought Jefferson and Franklin had far more respect for than George Greville or Lord North. They also joined with a strong strand of nonconformist radicalism, of radical Protestantism, which Wedgwood imbued from his regular attendance at the Lunar Society in Birmingham. You will remember that Wedgwood is the grandson of a Unitarian minister. His mother, Mary Stringer, his father, an Anglican, but Mary taking on the Unitarian inheritance of her father. But it's at the Lunar Society And here we have this terrible depiction from the 1870s of what the Lunar Society might have looked like, but a much better picture of Matthew Bolton's living room at his manufactory in Birmingham, where the lunatics, the great Joseph Priestley and Wedgwood and Erasmus Darwin and Lovell Edgeworth used to meet. And they're members of the Lunar Society, who used to meet, as you know, on the Monday after the full moon to discuss the debate ideas of the day. They were deeply sympathetic to the politics of dissent, liberalism, and internationalism. In the words of Edgeworth, they stood against the forces of Toryism and love of gain. Joseph Priestley's scientific philosophy was intimately linked to his nonconformist credo and commitment to social change. The ruthless logic of science would not only reveal Priestley as a scientist thought nature's secrets, but also strip away all the corruption and mystery which underpin church and king conservatism. In his experiments and observations on different kinds of air, Joseph Priestley celebrated science for its capacity to undermine all undue and usurped authority. And he hoped that the ancien regime now had reason to tremble even at an air pump or an electrical machine. We are, Priestley wrote, laying gunpowder grain by grain under the old building of error and superstition, which a single spark may hereafter inflame so as to produce an instantaneous explosion. The conservative thinker and politician Edmund Burke certainly understood the radical implications of Priestley's scientific advances and the Lunar Society. He wrote, "These philosophers consider man in their experiments no more than they do mice in an air pump or in a recipient of mephitic gas." And Wedgwood was part of this circle. Wedgwood's radicalism is intimately connected to this nonconformist radical Protestant critique of church and king conservatism, and this belief that the mysteries of the natural world as the natural philosophers would also expose to sunlight the mystery and corruption of the political order. In the public realm, the political figure with whom Josiah Wedgwood most readily aligned himself was the great radical Democrat, rake, and pamphleteer John Wilkes. Wilkes was elected Member of Parliament for Aylesbury, Middlesex in 1757, and his brilliance lay in his acerbic journalism as he used his publication North Britain to attack the ministry of King George III and, crucially, his Scottish favourite, Lord Bute, for his handling of the Peace of Paris, which ended the 7 Years' War. Time and again, the government sought to expel Wilkes from Parliament. And time and again, the public kind of rose up, particularly the artisans of London, the apprentices, his electors in Middlesex, to argue his case for being returned to Parliament. And Wilkes then was the great defender of the rights of parliamentarians, the rights of the public against the executive, following the tradition of Magna Carta. For Samuel Johnson, Wilkes and his brand of patriotism was, as he famously said, patriotism, the last refuge of a scoundrel. But to his London and Middlesex supporters, Wilkes joined the sacred pantheon of John Hampden, John Lilburne, John Pym in the struggle for English liberty, and it's embodied in all those important principles of trial by jury, habeas corpus, and the ballot box. And around Wilkes emerged this very strong civil society of patriot clubs, voluntary associations, and public demonstrations. And Wedgwood was part of that. Here we have this beautiful small teapot, which is in the V&A collection of earthenware printed by Sadler and Green up in Liverpool. You see John Wilkes celebrated with the quill in his hand. And on the back of this teapot is the legend Wilkes and Liberty. And Wilkes is there as the symbol of the defender of Magna Carta rights. As Linda Colley put it, for these activists, which we can include Wedgwood, the affair of John Wilkes was just part of their political education, only a step on the way to a more protracted commitment to parliamentary reform and policy change, annual parliaments, an extension of the franchise, a crackdown on bribery, and a repeal of the measures that were alienating the Americans. So Wedgwood is firmly within this radical patriot tradition of criticizing government and using his design skills, using the material culture to pursue that. And as I said, he saw the struggle for liberty in America as part of the true calling of Englishmen, be they on either side of the pond. And so this was the political ideology that led Wedgwood to support the 13 colonies in their struggle against King George III. Wedgwood's nonconformist inheritance, his commitment to religious toleration, and growing enthusiasm for democracy ensured his early sympathy for the Continental Congress. He regarded Franklin, Washington, Adams, Jefferson, and the drafters of the Declaration of Independence as fellow patriots, seeking simply to reclaim their true Magna Carta rights from a corrupted British government. And in the privacy of his modeling studio, he designed an intaglio which showed his ideological commitment to the American struggle for independence, depicting a coiled rattlesnake, as you can see, with its tail raised and jaws open, above which was embossed the legend, "Don't tread on me." It was a motif of deadly resistance, originally conceived by Benjamin Franklin and then widely adopted amongst the rebel troops of the Continental Army, the Continental Navy, as well as the South Carolina Congress. But I fear if any audience is going to tell me I've got some of that wrong, it is going to be the seminar this evening. The rattlesnake would soon join the bald-headed eagle as a symbol of a free, revolutionary, independent America. Wedgwood's version was based on a description in the London Chronicle of a Grand Union flag encompassing the rattlesnake image. He wrote codedly to Bentley at the height of the conflict. "The rattlesnake is in hand. I think it will be best to keep such unchristian articles for private trade." So here is Wedgwood in Staffordshire, which is an incredibly loyalist county, supporting the American revolutionaries in their campaign against King George. Now, of course, Thomas Bentley is absolutely crucial to this political education. Time and again, their correspondence is taken up with Bentley's suggestion of extra reading from various radical pamphleteers. Bentley, the great business partner of Wedgwood, is also absolutely essential, not only in his design sort of outlook for Wedgwood, his knowledge of the Grand Tour, his sophistication as a kind of connoisseur, as a cultural figure. Not only is he absolutely essential in assisting with marketing and selling the product, he is also absolutely crucial in the political education of Josiah Wedgwood. As a friend of Benjamin Franklin and fellow regular of the Progressive Circle at Old Slaughter's Coffee House in the City of London, Thomas Bentley remained well connected with international republicanism. I thank you for your good letter and shall be much obliged to you for Dr. Price's book, Wedgwood wrote in 1776, after Bentley alerted him to Price's Nature of Civil Liberty, the Principles of Government, and the Justice and Policy of the War with America, the latest work of the Unitarian minister and fervent supporter of the American Revolution. Great Britain, Josiah Wedgwood thought, quotes, "wants something to frighten it and do it good. I had seen some extracts from this publication and determined to send for it." After reading it quickly, Wedgwood concluded that those who are neither converted nor frightened into a better way of thinking by reading this excellent and alarming book may be given up for hardened sinners beyond the reach of conviction. And it was a short journey from Richard Price to Thomas Paine. And again, it's Bentley who introduces him to the work of Paine. I thank you for your obliging present of common sense and will give it a careful reading the first opportunity. Wedgwood wrote on receiving Paine's manifesto for American liberty and Republican government. He had also sought an early copy of Jean-Jacques Rousseau's treatise on education and human nature Emile. So there is this radical political education coming from Bentley, which Wedgwood, who looks up to Bentley enormously and is slightly naive sometimes in his own political philosophy, is taken on board. And Bentley is the great campaigner not only for democracy, but also for female rights and female participation in the political process. So after reading Paine, when the French Revolution broke out in July 1789 with the storming of the Bastille, almost as if to underscore Edmund Burke's warning, Wedgwood was unbelievably excited. So he famously writes to Erasmus Darwin, when news of the Bastille, the storming of the Bastille comes to Britain, quotes, "I know you will rejoice with me in the glorious revolution which has taken place in France. The politicians tell me that as a manufacturer I shall be ruined if France has her liberty, but I'm willing to take my chance in that respect. Nor do I yet see that the happiness of one nation includes in it the misery of its next neighbor." This Thomas Paine infused idea of human rights also finally and most famously fed into his campaign for the abolition of slavery. Wedgwood supported abolition, even though he had grown rich in many ways through the Georgian economy of sugar and slavery, even though the rise in real wealth in the mid-18th century intimately connected to the history of slavery. Wedgwood becomes convinced of the moral turpitude and wrongness of slavery in the 1780s, and is, we all know, one of the big campaigners for its abolition. But all of this political philosophy came together. For Josiah Wedgwood, human progress meant not only technological and scientific advance in the kilns and the lecture rooms of the Midlands, but really a broader ideal of advancing political governance, freedom, human rights, and personal freedom. Jos Wedgwood, his son, remembered his father predicting, quotes, "The time is fast approaching when the slave trade and the other abuses of government will be destroyed, and justice will be admitted as the ruling principle of legislation and politics." So that's really the second major contention within the book. First, geopolitics, the second, really unpicking some of the political philosophy of Josiah Wedgwood. The final area I wish to touch upon, and where hopefully I make some advances in the book, is in the epilogue, and really research into the collapse of the business and the collapse of the company. Because, as I intimated at the beginning, when I was elected Member of Parliament for Stoke-on-Trent, business had just gone into administration in 2009, and the final section of the book charts this process and reflects then upon Josiah Wedgwood and his own business life and lessons. As with large parts of British manufacturing in the 1970s and 80s, the Wedgwood business faced headwinds. A pushing exchange rate undermined exports, and consumer tastes were beginning to shift in Britain and America with the decline of the wedding list and ceramic gifting. The expansion of both eating out in restaurants and ordering in from takeaways hit the tableware market, as did the move towards much more informal dinner parties and TV family suppers. Yet the business of Wedgwood had an underlying profitability, and under strong management continued to do well. In 1986, Wedgwood PLC employed 12,000 people worldwide, had a turnover of £150 million, so $250 million, and made a profit of around $25 million for its shareholders, and was a proud and confident pillar of the potteries. This was under the leadership of Sir Arthur Bryan. But the mid-80s, as many of us will remember, was a time of kind of hyper-capitalism and the takeover craze, frenzy was in full peg. And Sir Arthur resisted takeovers for a number of years until, under pressure from institutional shareholders in 1987, he agreed to merge with Waterford Crystal, which led to the former boss of Hines Group, Sir Tony O'Reilly, taking the helm of the Wedgwood business. And what O'Reilly introduced was a determination in the 1990s to grow revenue at all cost, which then saw design quality slip and production weaken. Tony O'Reilly's hand-picked management board had very little idea of how to run a successful pottery business, and malfunction escalated within the supply chain, distribution, and sales. The problem for the business was never with the unit cost of production at Barlaston, at the Barlaston factory, where a skilled and dedicated workforce was still able to produce a high-quality ceramic stamped with the prestigious Wedgwood mark. The production process was less at fault than the appalling management, distribution, and retail operation. The designer David Queensbury reported that his business had worked closely with the John Lewis department store in the UK, and quotes, "In 2007, the buyer of china and glass told me she had in the last year received approximately 60%, only 60% of the Wedgwood products she ordered. When you consider that the company was not achieving its required sales, this is an abysmal performance." Poor operational oversight was compounded by terrible missteps in brand management and market development. Ever eager for profit, Josiah Wedgwood I had always been on the lookout for new consumers, both domestic and international, with that incredible network of ambassadors and agents going around the world. But in the 1990s, the Wedgwood business stuck resolutely with its British and American markets, even as new opportunities opened in the Gulf states and Southeast Asia. Mistakes at home were equally damaging. If families were no longer bringing out the best china for elaborate set-piece meals, then across Britain, more and more people were eating out. Pubs began to turn into gastropubs. More and more restaurants opened. The culture of consuming tableware, hotelware began to change. And other leading Stoke-on-Trent manufacturers, such as Churchill China, Steelite, and Dudson, as well as German business, obviously, Villeroy, and Dubai-based Pax Porcelain, saw the growth of hospitality ware as a major sales opportunity. But Wedgwood abandoned the hotel and restaurant sector. And again, this was a massive strategic mistake along the path to 2009. The impact of 9/11 on American consumer confidence, the collapse of the dollar against the euro, a sustained unwillingness to invest in design or marketing ensured that sales and profits plummeted across all brands from the late 90s into the early 2000s. In November 2001, the business announced job losses of over 1,400 across the group, with 500 roles taken out of the Barlaston factory alone. Those who had been managing Waterford Crystal, which O'Reilly brought into the business, had no feel for what it meant to manage a Wedgwood pottery. Over the ensuing years, net debts rocketed, and the company decided to strip out more production from the UK operation. It closed the celebrated Meakin Eagle Works in Hanley, some of the last bottle kilns, and with options running out and losses escalating, the last dice was thrown. And here is the kind of epic, in a sense, moment that the O'Reilly team came to the conclusion that the problem was not about management or distribution or design or quality. The problem lay in the unit cost of production in the UK. And so they purchased Royal Doulton in 2005, and they do so in order to gain access to a network of factories in Indonesia, just outside Jakarta, where they systematically start exporting the work from Stoke-on-Trent to Indonesia. So Stoke-on-Trent is kind of thinned out of these pottery jobs from Royal Dalton, from the Johnson brothers, from Wedgwood, because they'd accumulated all together. And the jobs are exported to a town called Tangerang, just outside Jakarta in Western Java. There, a workforce of 2,000 with obviously much lower labor costs, but also much lower health and safety and environmental costs, produce work at 1/8 of the wage of British workers. And more work was sent out there. So whereas Josiah Wedgwood had wanted to conquer Peking, Josiah Wedgwood, as we began this tour, was full of ambition for having his ware sort of flood China made in Stoke. The modern inheritors of Wedgwood flipped it, and they exported all the product and development and jobs to the Far East, with terrible consequences for the quality of the brand. Josiah Wedgwood and Thomas Bentley wrote in their 1787 catalogue, "The desire of selling much in a little time, without respect to the taste or quality of the goods, leads manufacturers and merchants to ruin the reputation of the articles which they manufacture and deal in." And that's what happened. At a stroke, Wedgwood was undermined as discerning consumers in the UK, America, Japan, and the Gulf were unsurprisingly put off by poorly made and poorly packaged goods which said made in Indonesia. If you ask a customer, they would prefer to be made in England, but it's not an important part of the purchase, explained Wedgwood's marketing director. The reassurance of the Wedgwood name is good enough for the consumer. But evidence suggests the loss of authenticity hit sales in the UK and abroad. Retailers interviewed in a study in the north of England revealed that, quotes, consumers were regularly declining to buy Wedgwood when they discovered it was outsourced. And what makes this all the sort of more stark is that Wedgwood is the pioneer of brand authenticity. Wedgwood is the pioneer of the back stamp. He makes sure that his ware has that unique Wedgwood logo on it because he wanted it to be authentic. And what the modern inheritors of Wedgwood did, they'd say Wedgwood England, not made in England, just Wedgwood England, trying to convince people it was still made in England. So Waterford Wedgwood PLC, or Waterford Wedgwood Royal Dalton, as it ultimately became, its collapse was not the victim of the credit crunch or unexplained market forces. It was destroyed, I argue, by a sustained disavowal of Josiah Wedgwood's precepts for success. Again, what did Wedgwood say? His consistent mantra was that, quotes, low prices must beget a low quality in the manufacture, which will beget contempt, which will beget neglect and disuse, and there is an end of the trade. And there was an end of the trade. They went for a low price, low quality solution, and they were found out, and the business collapsed. From cost control to product design to marketing technology to backstamping to brand equity, the inheritors of the Wedgwood legend killed value by upending the business ethos that had been established first in 1759. And in a tragic misreading of the past, the new managers thought the key to success was not to rival China, as Wedgwood had sought to do with his earthenware alternative to porcelain, but instead to give in to a low-cost, low-quality solution by offshoring production abroad. As globalization came calling for the ceramics industry, the owners of Waterford Wedgwood made absolutely the wrong strategic call, and Stoke-on-Trent paid the price. So after the immediate period of the O'Reillys, it goes into administration 2009. It's bought out by an American-based private equity company, KPS Capital Partners, who essentially turn a profit by building on the surrounding greenfield land. The book ends, I hope, on a more positive note. The company is now owned by a business called Fiskars, which is a Finnish conglomerate. To my mind, too much production is still outsourced abroad, but the company is now investing in design and thinking about a long-term future for the business. And the V&A, as I said, is now the custodian of the Wedgwood collection and archive. And we've been working over the summer, for example, with local schools in Stoke-on-Trent, thinking about Josiah Wedgwood's history in the abolition movement, and asking them to reflect upon that in terms of anti-racist work and anti-racist designs today. And so we produced this this display most recently in the museum, getting young people to understand the importance of Wedgwood, connect with the history, thinking about radicalism and design, working on it themselves, doing all those things that a kind of active, engaged museum should be doing. And there's a new energy at the museum there, which is really, really exciting. As you know, Josiah Wedgwood expired in his bed at Etruria Hall, a very wealthy man in 1795, looking out over a Great Britain utterly reshaped during his lifetime. And this remarkable picture from 1865 of Etruria Hall, you can see Stoke on Trent coming towards him, and then the bottle kiln and the factory down below. Wedgwood's determination to end the dominance of Chinese porcelain and build a pottery business with global recognition inaugurated a transformation of industry and commerce, design and marketing, the relationship between regions and capital, and that great divergence, the replacement of China in the mass consumer market in the latter half of the 18th century. At the same time, he embedded within his wear the 18th century's great themes of enlightenment, neoclassicism, revolutionary liberty, and national identity. Out of the bottle kilns and modeling studios of Etruria came a clay narrative of the century, which captured the fashion and instincts of the era, but also molded some of the principles and rituals of sociability for centuries to come. Wedgwood, the artist, scientist, entrepreneur, and internationalist, was elemental to Georgian consumer society and the Industrial Revolution. In the process, he reconfigured Stoke on Trent. He turned the potteries into a synonym, obviously, for pottery itself. Josiah Wedgwood's epitaph in Stoke Minster heralds him as the innovator, quotes, who converted a rude and inconsiderable manufacture into an elegant art and an important branch of national commerce. As William Gladstone in 1863 put it, Wedgwood was the greatest man who ever, in any age or in any country, applied himself to the important work of uniting art with industry. And that's why it feels so right to be talking about him and celebrating him at the V&A, because from our own origins as a museum in the Great Exhibition of 1851, our initial title is the Museum of Manufacture. Uniting art with industry has been at the heart of what we do at the museum. So it is a huge privilege and a daunting honor now to be in charge of the Wedgwood collection, and with our colleagues at Birmingham Museum in Alabama, continue to honor his legacy and his contemporary relevance in collections and now with this work in print. And I leave you just with this wonderful picture from our collection at Wedgwood, which is the bicentennial of Wedgwood's birth, where all of the Etruscans were made to dress up as Portland vases in a great festival of joy of Wedgwood and his great contribution to British design, culture, and really global history. I hope you enjoy the book. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Tristram. That was super interesting. Can't wait to see the book. We do have some comments and questions in the chat, so I'm just going to go through and read some of those and see if you can, if you have any comments. So Joseph Bothwell wrote, I would rather think of Jobs as the Wedgwood of today. The other way around.
I think that's very, very fair. Yeah, is my kind of political cynicism getting ahead of me. I mean, I think no, absolutely. I think yeah, I think Jobs, in a sense, as one tries to reintroduce a historical figure to a contemporary audience, having kind of accessing it through someone like Jobs, who is sort of understood, and people I do think understand Jobs did have this amazing combination of, you know, the design and the production and the efficient and almost that kind of totalizing vision. And, you know, of course it doesn't, you know, wholly stand up, but it's a way, I hope, that allows readers who aren't familiar with Wedgwood or his history to think about him in a more accessible manner, I suppose.
I think it's a very good comparison, actually. Not one I'd ever thought of. We have another, just a comment by Julie Hughes, that Matthew Bolton is often has too low a place in the Wedgwood story. What do you think of that?
I think that's right. Yeah, I mean, Matthew Bolton in the UK is you know, has a fairly decent profile, and is kind of understood and admired, and people, you know, lots of work goes on at Soho House, and there's a sense of him. But I think I think his place with Wedgwood, and actually there's the fascinating competitive spur that they both want to be great business people, and Wedgwood enjoys that. Wedgwood loves competition. Then and actually when they do try and work together in terms of vase production, it kind of doesn't really work out. But as political soulmates and as Enlightenment figures, there's great admiration and sort of camaraderie between them. And he looks crucially to he looks to Soho for his model for Etruria, that he looks to what Bolton had achieved there in terms of a transformation of manufacturing as what he wants to achieve with manufacturing in Soho. I think stressing the debt to Bolton is correct.
So another question, how did Josiah Wedgwood's interest in the neoclassical style help to change taste during the second half of the 18th century?
I think it's that classic thing. He and this is his brilliance. This is his brilliance, and it's Bentley who is so important in this. Of the impact of the Grand Tour, the archaeological digs at Herculaneum and Pompeii, the beginning of this feel towards neoclassicism as a fashion and a style. And he kind of breathes deeply, sort of drops all the Rococo, drops all of that, the cauliflowers and the pineapples, and absolutely goes for it. And because he's so open and honest, there are these letters of almost sort of torture saying, oh, we're trying to do Achilles now, we're trying to strip out all the fripperies, and so he doesn't begin the fashion, but he catches the wave at an early enough point to absolutely ride with it, and then he makes it popular. And what he does so brilliantly is what he always does, which is to attract the attention of what he called the legislators in taste, what today would call the influencers. And so putting his vases in the homes of the great aristocrats, getting the support of the leading society ladies of the time, that establishes the importance of neoclassicism as the design aesthetic. And that's what then pushes it to a middling audience. So not having initiated it, he rolls with it, and then I think is an important figure in the popularization of neoclassical interiors and design.
Here's a fun question. Does the V&A or the Wedgwood Museum have an example of the Portland vase dress that was worn in 1930?
That's a very good question. And I think the answer is no, but that might just be at the moment, because it was Katrin who, who's just said, Katrin who found this wonderful picture, Katrin Jones, our chief curator at the V&A Wedgwood collection. And she found this picture, and so there will be in a cupboard in Fenton or Longton one of these dresses somewhere, which we will have to unearth at some point. We should have one.
Yeah, absolutely. Someone has one passed down through the family that's just lying in someone's home. Very true.
Exactly.
I just had a last question. What was the most surprising thing you discovered about Wedgwood as you were doing your research?
That's a very, very good question. I think it was Wedgwood as a, it sounds very trite, but it was almost Wedgwood as a homemaker, that his great joy and delight in building Etruria Hall and the gardens, the great joy and satisfaction he had in family life, in the relationship he had with his daughter, Suki. There's lovely letters he writes about how they go riding together in the morning in the summer months. And it's that sort of humanity of Wedgwood, and openness, and kind of, today we'd call it sort of emotional intelligence, because he also knows when, you know, he kind of knows what he doesn't know, and he wants to be more emotionally literate. And there's a sort of, there's a naivety and a vulnerability to him there, but also I think an attractiveness about it. Even at the same time, he's, you know, transforming these factories and, you know, creating new products and, you know, being old wooden leg. So it was the sort of the humanity and emotional intelligence of Wedgwood.
Thank you so much. We don't have any additional questions. So Tristram, thank you. It's just been really wonderful to hear you and to see you today. So thank you so much. And I'm going to turn things back over to Lorraine.
Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us for today's lecture. I just want to let you all know that our next Zoom lecture will be held on Friday, the 19th of November, again at 2:30 on the East Coast in the US and 7:30 in the evening in the UK. And in November, we are very lucky to be able to host Robin Emerson, who is currently an independent consultant after having been the director of Decorative Arts Liverpool Museums for many, many years. Many of us have met him many times and know him well. The title of Robin's talk is going to be Georgian or Victorian? Wedgwood Jasper, especially black and white Jasper, and the test of history. Some specific information about this upcoming lecture and the link will be emailed to members, WIS members, and the information will also be sent to so many other ceramics groups, which we have been doing. Hopefully, yet again, they will be kind enough to WIS to distribute the information to all of their members. Just keep in mind that the link that we use for the Zoom lectures is the same link all the time. So you might want to tuck it away somewhere in your computer or make a note of it somewhere on your desk, because we use the same link all the time. Of course, the link will be posted in all of the emails, and it will be posted on the WIS Facebook page. So again, let me thank you for joining us today. I want you all to stay well and stay safe. And I want to extend a special thank you to Tristan for this amazing, amazing lecture. You said, oh, how hard it might be to speak to such a group. We all learned something, I can guarantee you. We're looking forward to reading the book in its entirety. Thank you to Anne for once again moderating and being a wonderful member of this committee. And thank you to Jeffrey for being the behind the scenes computer person. You can tell that I need a behind the scenes computer person. So thank you once again. Thank you, everyone. And hopefully you'll all join us again on the 19th of November. Bye now.